I always forget about that. We have it recorded. Okay, good. When we initiated our project, we, of course, were in person, and the emphasis of the group was to have artist residencies, Indigenous artist residencies. We managed to do one with Sebastian Calfuqueo Aliste, a Chilean Mapuche artist and activist. And it was phenomenal. Like, we have got a lot out of that residency. And part of our Unlearning Hour continuing after Sebastian's residency was to reflect and digest everything that he had left us with, in terms of our engagement with Indigenous artists and some of their contributions and perspectives. Um, this year and starting last semester, we pivoted to virtual, and we thought that our production would potentially be compromised, by the virtual format, but actually it has completely taken off. So we have a very busy agenda with a series of really exciting collaborators, that join us this semester and into next year. So I will, now that Richard is sort of, got his bearings, a quick transition from the radio show. We mentioned it, and hopefully you can share a little bit of that with us as well. But maybe Richard can kind of launch it, and we can do introductions, like I said, and then we can kind of go through some of the artist collaborations and events that we have planned for the spring.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for everyone being here. It's really nice to see so many faces. Those of you that have been consistently coming to this session last semester. It's also really nice to see the brothers Johnson in the same room. That is really good to see. So just to back up a little bit, so when Cachahuela Cuna began, we started a reading group, which was called This Decoloniality. And it was based on reading the book On Decoloniality by Walter Mignolo and Catherine E. Walsh. And it was also a kind of space for us to connect to broader questions of Indigenous art making and contexts beyond the regional focus of the Cachahuela Cuna group in the Andean and Amazonian regions. And so I think that the Unlearning Hour, and so originally it was a reading group, and then in person we had the Unlearning Hour, which was actually in the Wexner Cafe during the spring semester of 2019. And so we met there. Micah, I think I remember seeing you there one of those sessions. It's nice to see you again. Oh, and Greg, it's nice to see you back, who was there at the decoloniality group way at the beginning. And so we decided, given the pandemic, that we'd move to a virtual space. But also something great happened, and Michelle and I can talk more about this, that we interspersed these sessions with the formal workshops with the Pachasana Institute. Last semester was on epistemic justice, and this semester it's on storytelling. And so we had this amazing punctuation of having these kind of more open sessions to just reflect on these the Unlearning Hour sessions, and then also reflecting on the workshops themselves. So if you look at the web page, I can put it in the chat, but probably you've been to it already because you got this link. I'll put it in the chat after I've stopped speaking. You can see a kind of the schedule where there are open sessions for an Unlearning Hour and also then sessions for the group. And just one word about Unlearning. It's a kind of strategy for people within colonial contexts to rethink their entrenched knowledge systems. And unlearning is an active process. It's a process that we can do together. It's a process that we can do in conversation, but we're only limiting ourselves for an hour because it is quite a refreshing and kind of challenging practice. It's not something that we're not kind of laying down wisdom as such. We're kind of just reflecting on kind of delinking from certain traditions. And sometimes in our Unlearning Hour is like literally kind of checking in with the kind of relentless pace of academic life and life within certain cultural formations that we are embedded within, and specifically how Indigenous cultures actually help us rethink inherited values as well. So maybe what we could do now is just go around the Zoom. I won't call on people, so just turn on your mic when you feel like it, and just introduce yourself. And it'd be really nice to know just where you're connecting to us from in terms of your context, and maybe about how you understand this kind of principle of unlearning. And it doesn't have to be grounded in decolonial theory, or just what are you looking forward to unlearn this semester with us?
I can start. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mika Unsueta. I first heard the word hegemony in Michelle's class, actually. I believe it was my freshman spring at OSU. And as soon as I started putting my understanding of the word together in my own time, I kind of started piecing together that, oh, wow, I just have a lot of understandings of the world around me that I take for granted, that I take to be true, that aren't necessarily the truth. And that there are so many different perspectives out there. And that kind of got me interested in Indigenous literature, Indigenous culture. I started studying more into Latin America. I'm now working with Professor Wiebelsman as a student curator of the Andean art and Andean and Amazonian art and cultural artifacts collection. And I'm excited to be here. Like Richard mentioned, I have attended one meeting before, but now I'm excited that I can actually attend meetings this semester. I hope they're in the afternoons because I can't make them in the mornings. But I'm in my third year studying Latin America, Spanish. I love learning languages. And like I said, I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for sending the invitation. My name is Jonathan. Nice to meet you all. Jonathan Burgoyne, Department of Spanish and Portuguese. I'm interested in this topic for this semester because I've been working a lot on hodology, spatial narratives, mapping. In 14th century treatises, most of them are hunting manuals. I'm interested in learning about or getting new ideas about storytelling, creating alternative systems of knowledge. That's one of the approaches back, those who are looking at some of these treatises, looking at a different approach towards creating knowledge in space about nature, as opposed to a more Aristotelian, maybe scientific approach to studying nature. But anyways, spatial narrating, creating knowledge by moving through space, creating stories through movement in space, code ecology, green theories, green studies on approaches to the study of the representation of narratives, also, I mean, of nature in these stories that I'm finding in hunting manuals. Very fragmented bits of story, of narrative immersed in treatises about animal husbandry and hunting practices, but which create grounded sort of local systems of knowledge that are contrasted with inherited classical Greek, Roman, also filtered through Al-Andalus ideas about the universe and nature, right? So there's a competing view about the knowledge of the world around us. It's coming in these different kinds of narratives that I'm finding in some of these hunting manuals. So the subject for the topic for this semester's group was very interesting to me.
I'll jump in next and just say a lot of what Jonathan just said resonates with me as well. Not for the same specific reasons per se, but before I get into that, I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the curator for Thompson Special Collections at the University Libraries, and I'm the rare books and manuscripts guy. And within the rare books and manuscripts world, I'm decidedly on the early side of things. So I'm responsible for all of our collections from antiquity up until roughly 1800, give or take. But then I do other things on the modern side related to military history, pulp fiction, and a lot of the Latin American studies stuff that my colleague Pamela Espinosa Los Monteros and I have been kind of trying to build in terms of collections there. But generally speaking, a lot of what I'm responsible for at Ohio State is providing research and reference support and then teaching in a variety of contexts, whether they're single course session lectures or entire courses of my own. And a lot of the approach that I have to take is very artifact based and very materials based. So we do a lot of text stuff, of course. That's what books and manuscripts are created to house and to convey. But a lot of my teaching really takes the artifactual component into consideration and emphasizes how materiality, the codicology, that word that Jonathan mentioned, the study of the physical book and the meaning of the physical book or the object and the different layers of meaning and narrative that are embedded in a producer's choice of using animal skin or paper or silk or whatever it is that they're using, and how the inks are made, just everything. I won't drone on and on about that. I focus a lot on that. And as I've gotten more involved with the Cachevilla Laguna group and conversations with folks that are other co-PIs on this, but then also some of the readings that I've engaged with, there is a lot that the Indigenous world can inform me about how to approach a lot of the more traditional, say, European-centric collections that we have at Ohio State, and how to retask those in all sorts of new ways to kind of foster different types of inquiry. So I'm just constantly interested in looking at parallels and manufacturing new parallels, recognizing new parallels between the way Indigenous knowledge creators and art creators create things, perpetuate them, transmit them, and how we can kind of look at more traditional collections through that lens to understand them in different ways. More directly, I'm very, very interested in all of this stuff because we are trying to build an active collection of actual Indigenous and Indigenous related Latin American materials at the library. It's slow going for a lot of reasons, ranging from availability and expense to politics. There's the entire question about what right do we have at Ohio State to remove things ostensibly from their original cultural context. So it's also about thinking about flexible ways about how we can, if not build those physical collections here at OSU, what kinds of partnerships, what might we enter into with a community in the Yucatan to think about curating, say, for instance, paper arts. So we've got all sorts of conversations like that going on, but that's where my interests lie. And I don't know if he wants to go considering the screen's active, but.
Just to be clear, Eric, I said hodology, although I am very much interested in codicology.
Oh, I thought you said codicology.
No, that too.
Secondarily.
Reading as spatially situated, I'm into that too, but no,
okay.
Hodology, the studies of pathways.
Well, I'm Kurt. I know several of you, and it's really great to see you again. I've missed you. And I'm Eric's brother. I'm visiting Columbus for a couple of weeks, but I'm trying to reprogram myself. And hopefully, you know, I don't mean that to sound self-centered or anything. Hopefully that will help somebody else in the future.
And I should say, from both of our contexts, we're also interested in this because when we were kids, our family moved us to South America. So we lived in South America and Colombia for a couple of years, but traveled in the Colombian jungles, and we've been up in the Andes and to the Ecuador, Peru, all of that stuff. And so we've kind of got a lifelong interest in South American culture as well. And then we grew up on the Texas-Mexico border and have that whole end of things too to drive interest.
I can say something briefly, especially because I need to leave at 1:45. But I'm Elena Fowles. I'm in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, a colleague of Michelle's. I actually met Sebastian in was it last year? Fall 2019, right? And it was a great experience. I participated in one of the workshops, and I also was able to interview him for a podcast. And I'm here to learn. I'm just here to learn and find out more about this. I don't know that I can commit to every meeting scheduled this semester, but I'm gonna try to join you as frequently as I can.
I guess I can jump in next because I'm also here to learn. I'm new to the university as of the fall. I'm a PhD student in the Arts Administration, Education, and Policy program. And I started in with this group early in the semester, and pretty much I think was a part of all of the meetings and workshops as much as possible, and really appreciated both the conversations of our distance and learning hour, but also the Pakisana workshops, and how much I really just loved learning from those experiences and being a part of them. And I'm really looking forward to the storytelling kind of focus of this semester. I'm taking a couple of research classes, one of which is an arts-based research course this semester, and really thinking about my own research practice and kind of where I'm coming from and how I'm situated. And I think this will be a really great component to a lot of things kind of coming together for me, hopefully this semester. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Okay, I'll go next. I'm Paige Dempsey. I am also new to the university. I'm a first year MA student in the Department of Arts Administration, Education, and Policy. Tamron told me about it, and I'm here to learn as well. I was very interested when I was poking around at the storytelling for social justice workshops. I'm really excited about those and excited to meet all of you.
I can go next if that's okay. My name is Alana Radler-Deser. I have many affiliations to this group, I guess. Officially, I'm a PhD student in art history at Ohio State, currently out in LA working at the Getty on a manuscript project. My research centers on Nahua communities of central Mexico, but taking the indigenous global perspective. My research is focused primarily on the 16th century and manuscript production, but I work currently with a Nahua community on the Gulf Coast of Mexico in the Huasteca Veracruzana. So really my practice is a lot about bringing living traditions and a perspective about the living, and actually taking this from the interview that Richard just did on the radio. This idea that art making is a practice that is active and not an idea of preservation, preserving an object for some future, but that these traditions are living, and the things that were happening in the 16th century are part of a living tradition that is continuing today, and that if there's a preservation in it, it is the practice of this tradition. So trying to reorient my thinking from my Western American point of view to recenter on these kinds of ideas, and like you're saying about considering the movement through the landscape and the importance of the landscape in our lived experience. So happy to be here, happy to see all of you again.
Hi, I'm Lori Esposito. I'm in my first year as a PhD student, and I was in Dr. Fletcher's theory class last semester, which is how I found out about the Unlearning Hour. But it being my first semester, things were kind of crazy in my schedule, so I wasn't able to really participate last semester. I hope that changes this semester and I can make it here more often. I think I made maybe like one meeting. But even that being the last meeting, it was still a really wonderful kind of vibe and space. And so I've just been really looking forward to participating this semester. I just say a little bit. Right now, I'm interested in collaborative drawing spaces, trauma-informed practice, disabilities culture. I'm doing some research right now at the Comic Library looking at semiotics of comics and the use of hangman in curriculum, and thinking about radical pedagogy and like alternatives, and I think the Unlearning Hour might actually lend some useful criticality to this project that I'm developing with others, and So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm just really glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I hope you can all hear me. My name's Greg Anderson, little village an hour from us where the connection is often pretty shaky. So that's why I've got the frozen portrait there. Also, just a quick shout out to Kurt. Kurt Johnson and I had a very nice exchange a little while ago on the general matters of concern to the group, and it's very nice to see him in person. He's a much better bass player than I am, that much I know. And as for what I do, I'm in the history department, but I guess I could say I've been trying to unlearn history for many years now. And what I do in my work is to press the idea that humans have always lived in many different worlds of experience, not in just the one universal world that, of course, our modern Western society completely takes for granted. It's a real uphill battle to convince people to see things in these other ways. It's especially within the field of history. But I'm doing my best. I like this group because it's one of the places campus where I feel there are actually some kindred spirits, unlike in my own department, which is terribly unsympathetic to the kinds of things I do. Not openly, of course, everyone's far too polite, but it's just, this stuff just goes so deep. I mean, I can't tell you how deep it goes, and expecting specialists in history to effectively completely unlearn what they already know, what it is they pride themselves on knowing and how they know it, is maybe too much to expect. So I think, the general impulse behind a group like this certainly has its work cut out for it. But, it's very encouraging to see how many people are interested in it from all kinds of different perspectives. And as I say, it's nice for me to be around some people who are kindred spirits.
Greg, could I just wanted to ask, while you're here, ask you the question if you've read this book at all, given your field?
I have not, Richard, no.
Yeah, it's not specific to Indigenous questions, but Ariella Azule, the Unlearning Imperialism project is it's a really challenging. I just think haven't seen you for a while. I just think you'd really appreciate her perspective on unlearning. She's a art historian who works on photography and images. So she works on archives of images, but she really sees photography as kind of a moment to kind of go back in time to engage with different narratives or narratives of the positions of individuals in documentary photography that have been kind of hidden. And so she sees kind of individuals in photographs, especially of protests and of displacement, as kind of openings up for an unlearning of imperialism. And this idea of potential history, which I think you'd really, really register with you. And I think it would register with our group a little bit as well.
Thank you, Richard. Duly noted.
So let me invite Dale to introduce himself, and then I want to introduce some of the co-PIs of the group.
Hi, sorry, my screen is blank too, because sometimes I have connection issues, and I am also sorry I came in a bit late because I had something pop up that I wasn't able to join right from the beginning. So I am Dale Kiss. I'm a program manager in the College of Public Health. I help run research studies on different public health, epidemiology, health behavior, health promotion issues. I'm also a grad student, a master's student in the Glenn College of Public Policy. And I've just always been interested in kind of trying to find ways to help people reach each other who don't understand each other. I think that there are a lot of ways in our current society where people are not able to understand where each other are coming from, and that a lot of the friction that we see is as a result of people's either inability or unwillingness to kind of to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And so I just saw the advertisement for this group, and I thought it sounded interesting to check out and see, to what extent some of this might be useful, which unfortunately I missed the opening session. I saw it's being recorded, so hopefully that will be available to us later.
Thank you. Yeah, and we will have the recording sessions, available to people on the website, and then also through the listserv. We'll send them out. So, yeah, I'm Michelle Whipplesman. I'm the lead co-PI for the Cachahuillecuna project, but we are a pretty formidable team, I would say, and we have here Eric Johnson, who is one of our co-PIs, Pamela Espinosa de los Monteros, who Eric mentioned, also in university libraries as one of our co-PIs. Alana Radlazur joins us as one of the graduate administrative assistants for the project in the past. Andrew Mitchell is our current graduate assistant, but wasn't able to make it to this session. Other co-PIs on the project include Gisela Latorre from Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Elvia Andia, who is in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and is our Quechua instructor. And Mika, you forgot to mention among your languages that you're studying that you're tackling Quechua, which is fantastic. And we have Alcira Dueñas in history, also participating in our project. We have I guess a new configuration. I guess I'll mention it later, but I'll mention one of the co-PIs in the new configuration moving forward is Isis Barracosta, also in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, focusing on Brazil. So sort of expanding a little bit our kind of scope, of Andean Amazonia to be sure to include the Brazilian Amazon, not just the Amazonian area of Andean countries, which we were kind of focused on before. So I wanted to just say that the project, just to introduce what the Cachahuillecuna project is about, is a focus on artistic production, material cultural production, performance, working with indigenous artists, and looking at those practices as knowledge producing, meaning making practices. So not just what people produce and what they know, but how they know it, exactly as Greg Anderson just sort of mentioned. One of the objectives of the group has to do with mobilizing methodologies, right? So how can we not just critically evaluate the methods that we use, but also start integrating and engaging with some of these indigenous epistemologies in our own classrooms, for alternative practices, alternative methods, both in our research and in our classrooms. Another key component that we have for the group is legacy preservation and the production of shareable resources. And Eric Johnson and Pamela Espinosa de los Monteros have really spearheaded that initiative through the libraries with a working group that is dedicated to that type of endeavor. And again, I just want to underscore, that what we attempt to do, by way of our collaborations with our community partners, and we'll get into all of the community partners that we have, has to do with not just inviting them to give a talk, seeing what we can get out of it, right? But really engaging with some of the practices that they do, and not just engaging with, but supporting their endeavors in their own communities and their practices as artists. As I mentioned, we pivoted toward the virtual, forum because of the COVID shutdown. Some of our projects were compromised, but we have done a really nice job of kind of like changing with the times. So, for instance, we did have an exhibit and a panel discussion program for last spring that's called Dancing with Devils, on mask traditions and festivals in Latin America that's kind of emerged from a donation that we received from one of our alumni who had worked in Latin America and donated a series of masks, Diablo masks. And Libraries has done an amazing job of going virtual. So we will announce that soon, that virtual tour of the exhibit, and then hopefully an in-person exhibit once things open up. Our project continues, and I do have some good news, which is that we had applied for a Centers Collaborative Grant under the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery Theme opportunities, and we won the grant. And the Center's collaboration involves Center for Latin American Studies and the Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design, so ACAD. The new, we insisted on keeping our Cachawillaicuna name as sort of like a second phase of Cachawillaicuna. And the new name is Cachawillaicuna Indigenous Performance, Past, Present, and Emerging. And it will pair like this unique collaboration of traditional artists of the Andes and Amazonia with, and specifically, work in the Motion Lab, which has like cutting edge technology, you know, for all types of performance and production, storytelling, digital arts, that type of thing. So we're very excited about that. That won't launch until next year sometime, but it does give us a pathway for continuation in the work that we do as a group. And the other very critical thing is that it expands the scope. And this is something that Richard had sort of mentioned and emphasized, you know, where rather than focusing, we still continue to work with Andean and Amazonian indigenous artists, but in the context and in dialogue with global indigenous artists, especially for kind of like global South intersectionalities, you know, in both their work and their perspectives. I'm the curator for the Andean and Amazonian Cultural Artifacts Collection, and this semester we have Mika Unsueta and also Tamron McDermott participating as student curators, and we have a group of 7 curators. So this is very exciting as we move forward with actually working with those artifacts and thinking about problematizing, you know, our own practices of display and collection and that type of thing, you know. And I teach the Andean Music Ensemble at Ohio State, and that has become a real interesting experimental forum for alternative methodologies. The workshops that we experienced with Pachaisana last semester on epistemic justice had a lot to do with embodiment and also with radical listening, and we brought those practices, you know, those exercises from those workshops directly into the classroom, you know, by way of the ensemble. So I just wanted to say those few things about what the project is about, where we're headed, and then maybe we can launch into letting you know kind of what's going on this spring. So I'll just kick it off and then I'll hand it off to Richard. We can kind of go back and forth, Richard, in terms of presentation of the projects. But the Pachaisana workshops that are scheduled should be really exciting. They're backed by popular demand. We had such a great experience with them last semester. And the characteristic of this particular group, which is also a third-party provider for study abroad for our undergrads, is that they focus entirely on performance methods, theater methods, you know, and bring these discussions into this realm of embodied, you know, experience, representation, reflection, you know, that type of thing. And this semester, the storytelling for social change really engages oral traditions, you know, of the Andes and Amazonia. There's another global arts and humanities discovery theme that focuses specifically on storytelling. So that will be an interesting sort of, hopefully we'll get participation from those folks as well. And I agree with Richard that the kind of toggling back and forth from the workshops to these sessions of reflection, you know, about the workshops, and then open sessions for just discussion as our Unlearning Hour. For those of you who mentioned that you're here to learn, sorry to disappoint, but we're here to unlearn. So, but in any case, I think that works really nicely, because what we see, thinking about the pace of things, right, is that often we produce events, but we really fail to pull it all together in terms of a proper reflection, you know, of the meaning and the experience that these things bring. So I'm looking forward to that very much. And I'll pass it on to Richard. Perhaps you can talk about our collaboration with Cassandra Press and also with the Columbus Printed Arts, which is a new collaboration.
Sure, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure we have time to kind of reflect a bit as well as kind of report back. I just 2 collaborations that Michelle mentioned. One is with the artist Candice Williams, an African-American artist based in LA, who runs this press called Cassandra Press, and Candice has been commissioned along with the Brazilian artist, Afro-Brazilian artist, Alina Baiana, to create a reader on the topic of erasure that crosses questions of Black and Indigenous survivance across the US and Brazil. And so they are working on it. They're putting it together, and they did an amazing kind of report back to our group on the process at the end of last semester. And hopefully sometime in one of these Unlearning hours, we'll have Candice and Alina back to talk about their process, and we'll have a launch event in the fall about that. Columbus Printed Arts is host to a reading room in Samoan, Potu Faitev Tusi, which is run by the Samoan artist Leolia Shragi as a guest librarian, and it is about Indigenous language work. And included in that is not only Sebastian as one of the visiting contributors to this project, but also two Guarani artists and editors of a newspaper, the first newspaper in Guarani, that was part of a project run by the Brazilian artist Maria Alves. And so with our support, we've been able to engage with these two newspaper editors, but also the community that they're part of there. And this is just starting, but if you have a chance to go to, I can, again, I'll add it to the links in the chat, to the project, because the copies of the newspaper are available. I think I have a copy here, which I can show you just briefly. At least I thought I did. No, it's not in the place I thought it was. Anyway, so there are two projects, but we can follow up on those. But what I thought I'd do is, again, I know that Elena has to leave, but I wanted, I think one of the most important things that we acknowledge right at this moment is our own positionality in the work that we're doing in terms of Indigenous arts and humanities. And as Michelle mentioned, and as Alana mentioned, I just have had this radio show that I started called Dear Fellow Settler Colonizer. And in that show, I read from Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, about the historical reality of this country as a settler colonial context. And even though our project is grounded in regions in the Andes and the Amazon, I think we are all doing this work from this place of a land grant or land grab university. And what Alana was mentioning from the show is part of a conversation I had with the Lakota artist Chinupa Hanska-Luga, where he's talking about maintenance rather than preservation. And I thought I'm just going to share a 5-minute clip of Hanska, of Chinupa Hanska-Luga speaking about this moment, because it's basically a clip where I ask him the big question and problem of the radio show as I presented it, which is why a settler like myself, who's excited about engaging with Indigenous art making, how can I communicate and talk about that excitement without kind of appropriating and mediating Indigenous creativity? And I think it's something that we can kind of register. So if that's okay with the group, if we just listen in, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to just briefly discuss. But the great thing about this Unlearning Hour is we can take on the discussions in the next time. We can pick up threads as they follow through as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. Actually, let me not share the screen. I'm going to unplug and you can hear it, because I think it's better to hear it that way. I guess so. The question that I wanted to kind of start with is, can you hear okay? So our listeners have just been hearing how I, Richard Fletcher, in this platform of mine as Plato, have gone through several what I've described as transformative experiences thanks to encounters with Indigenous artists and artworks. And this show in general, and in my work in general, I've been thinking about how to get the balance between communicating and sharing these experiences, even to the level of, as earlier in the show, how to even quote and read out texts and statements and positions from Indigenous artists. So how to share and communicate these while at the same time acknowledging that this work is not for me and not for the fellow settler colonizers on this, who I'm targeting the show for. It's not for us to mediate or appropriate for our own ends. So this is kind of like the big question of this show, kind of why does a settler colonizer feel this, you know, what can I do in order to share what this engagement has been without kind of occupying this position of mediation? And your presence here, Chanupa, is to dialogue with me, and I'm so grateful for you to dialogue with this very specific problem.
Yeah, well, the reality is we've never done anything alone, ever, you know? So I think it's important that we you know, flex our privilege where our privilege exists in order to amplify and move ideas that are outside. And if your position of privilege is that people are more inclined to listen to you and your voice within your community, transmitting ideas from Indigenous people becomes an asset to kind of filter through. It's not going to be the solution. It's not the direct answer, and it's not the word from the horse's mouth, you know. But what it is not everybody speaks horse, you know, and so you being able to like recontextualize that and speak in a language that's understood and received and accepted starts to push the bar towards a greater understanding. You know, you're not doing the work in a sense of having it completed. You're doing the work in the sense that it takes a long time to actually disseminate some of the preconceived notions, and so you're helping to like remove a few layers of these veils, right? I think it is important to be able to communicate some of these ideas, and I, as an artist, you know, this is the majority of what I do as well. I'm often in spaces that are controlled from Western lens and academia and understanding. And my experience and filter that I received is one of Indigenous customary knowledge. And so there are things that I might skip over because I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. And it's actually really helpful to work with somebody who can speak colonizer, you know. They might have questions that would dig deeper into things that I have taken for granted, that would help kind of alleviate some of those concepts and ideas, and have a more whole and generative kind of exchange, you know. So I do appreciate the space, and, you know, primarily the acknowledgement of our fault, you know, where it's one thing to weaponize our privilege, but it's another thing to recognize where we are lacking, you know, and recognizing that we cannot be authority in spaces that we are only visiting in, you know, and most of Western kind of systems of cataloging and organizing history and culture is an effort to preserve things. Whereas from my experience, and I believe the experience of most human beings on the planet, we are not in the business of preserving our cultures and history. We are in the business of maintaining it. And maintenance is a completely different narrative than preservation. Maintenance has an incomplete end, and it is constantly generative. Culture is an idea that's in flux. And I believe that that's true for art as well. We've celebrated it as objects, but art is a verb, and it is constantly, I don't make art, I do art, you know, I create things, and the creation is what is perfect. From that point on, it's subject to entropy and all of the cataloging and capitalistic kind of ideas and modes that are systemic in our global society. But what can't be taken away from me, and what I'm really interested in figuring out how to share, is the process, you know, to make something, to create something is really where art is its most powerful. And really, even the definition of art doesn't necessarily explain what it is. You know, this is intergenerational efforts, you know, things that we've learned from people who are already dead, that has been passed down from generation to generation. And we're just the edge of that. You know, we don't even know, it's continuously growing. We don't know how sharp it's going to get, you know, but it's, you know, it's generative. So there's something in that, I think, that is a position that you can exist in as well. You are not creating a book, you know, you are not writing down these things to be embedded in a historical context. You were operating in the realm of radio, and people get to hear these things, and when they retell those stories, they become their stories as well. So this is how we generate kind of culture as a process of maintenance versus preservation.
I'm really glad you mentioned this framing of the radio. Okay, so yeah, I do, because Alana brought it in, I think it was important to hear it from Chinuka himself, that this question of maintenance as well. I don't know if we can just spend the rest of our time just sharing our reflections on what was said there. It's only a short moment. I'm going to spend a bit of time also adding some links to the chat as well, so you can follow up. Yeah, just jump in.
You know, Richard, I really enjoyed the analogy he made to horses. And what I took away were basically sort of two ideas. You know, you come at the question in a conundrum, right? And you're maybe looking for an answer or a way out. And instead, what we got was that and instead of appropriation, another kind of appropriation or a possible appropriation, which is translation, right? We need somebody who can speak colonizer, and we need somebody who can speak horse, right? So he went to the idea of translation but not as a way of transfer, but as in the end as the inevitable way of creating, right? Creating. So it's not just about transmission either, right? And it certainly gets right at, you know, for me, the fallacy of equivalence, right? Which is often at the heart of lots of debates about discussion about translation, right? So he sees it as a translative act that leads to creativity. That's what I sort of took away from his comments, right? Which is tense, right? It doesn't mean that by translating you're not also appropriating, but it's a different, right? And at least it acknowledges that it's not a one-way street, that your translation is also part of his experience, right? Well, you know, I like the way he started it, right? Nothing is done we don't do anything by ourselves, right?
Yeah, it sort of invites us into a dialogical, relational sort of concept of knowledge making and stuff like that. The other thing that you know, both your comment, Jonathan, and listening to the radio show brings up for me along the lines of translation is thinking about how Quechua language works in an evocative sense, you know, and that it doesn't go straight for a literal efficient translation, but rather invites, you know, like this realm of creativity and context that different people who are participating in that process bring to it. The other concept that came to my mind is a concept that we've been working with significantly with Center for Latin American Studies, which is cultural humility. In contrast to cultural competency, maybe, you know, thinking of like a cultural competency as something that brings up something about like, you learn this, you're done, you know, it's contained, it's fixed, you know, versus the concept of cultural humility, which is much more open-ended as a lifelong learning process, constantly in flux, generative, you know. So I think that resonated really well with the ideas of maintenance. And for sure, for us, I'm taking notes, you know, for our curators as well, you know, that idea of like preservation versus maintenance, and what does that imply in practice, you know, for what we do.
I'll just say from my standpoint, what resonates is very much related to my job, which is I'm in charge of so many different types of collections at the library, and I'm not an expert in most of them. Yet there's always this expectation that I am. And there is this issue, one of getting comfortable with ignorance and getting comfortable with letting people know that you're not an expert in things. But then there's also the issue of me being in charge of so many different collections that stem from communities of which I am decidedly not a part. And how I find my role in that, and how I do this in an effective way so that I'm getting out of the way and I'm facilitating access while not claiming ownership of ideas or claiming ownership of specialist knowledge. And a real seminal moment for me in my career here was when someone from Near Eastern Languages and Cultures asked me to do a 2.5-hour session for a graduate Arabic course on Arabic manuscripts. And I was like, what do you want me to do? I don't know Arabic. I can't read it. I don't know that history. I'm not versed in it. And he looked at me and very calmly said, I understand all of that, but you know manuscripts. I don't know manuscripts. I know the languages. So if you can just focus on what you know, and the rest will fall into place. And so I spent 2 weeks in my obsessive way, like reading up everything I could in English, French, Italian, and Spanish that had to do with Arabic manuscript traditions. But then I went in and did my thing, and it was a real eye-opening experience for me, because here I was talking about a component of our collection that I had no previous knowledge of, and to this day still don't really know a whole lot about. Yet I was able to do this competently by internalizing that there are ways for me to tell this story that focus on both what I know about, say, the broad world of it, but very much acknowledging what I don't know and leaving that space for that kind of that empty space for new knowledge to develop, or for me to unlearn things, like stop looking at, in that case, stop looking at this teaching opportunity as being something I now need to go learn about. I can just focus on what I already know and then try to unlearn what I already know and let it kind of slot into that new culture or that new context. So all of that kind of resonates with me. And on a daily basis, I get approached by someone who asks me about our collections that I know nothing about. And so this is an ongoing process for me, and I find it a very powerful set of ideas to explore.
Can I just will be on the abstract side, but I think what the interview that Richard shared there helps us get at is a very foundational thing for this whole enterprise, which is talking about relationship between, as it were, art and the world, because part of what I think we can helpfully unlearn here is how we think about both what is art and both what is the world. In our modern Western way of thinking, we tend to think of art as a representational exercise, a world that is already there. It's kind of fixed, it's material, it's separate from ourselves. What the artist does is to try to, give us a different, as if that world is already there, separate from us. Whereas I think from what I know of indigenous and non-modern worlds in general is a very different sense of the relationship between the two, mainly because the self is a process, not fixed given material object, as it were, which we are trying to present through some human devices and mechanisms. And hence, if it is a process in which humans are actively implicated rather than standing apart, admiring it from afar, that is, we are entangled in it, whether we like it or not. And this is obviously fundamental, as far as I'm aware, to Andean and Amazonian cosmologies, whatever we want to call them, that we are just threads in the fabric of being. And hence, we can in a way, it helps at the very beginning of the exercise to both to rethink what the world actually is, but also to rethink what art is. If art is yet another activity which is about making the world rather than representing it from some other place, as we in the modern West tend to think of it as a generative, world producing activity. And all of the stories and the different artists that will, in a sense, reflect that. And so I think the interview, this idea that maintenance of a world through art, if we think of humans as integral, entangled components of a world, actively producing it rather than just trying to understand it and see it from afar, this helps us to make that, rather than as preserving, some fixed object, as it were. Maintenance gives us a sense of active production of a world, and of course co-producing it, because humans don't make the world all by themselves. They are entangled in all kinds of relationships which actually are the world. So I don't know if that's a helpful comment, but just to sort of put it in a perspective.
And not to mention object ontologies, right? So as we consider Andean and Amazonian art, that in many cases the art operates with its own agency, separate from, you know, human interpretation or production or anything like that. So that's an exciting aspect of it, you know, to kind of think about decentering, you know, the human in this thread, you know, as just one more of a thread, the same way that we decenter Western perspectives as one in many ways of looking at the world. So that's exciting.
Can I just say, yesterday I teach a graduate class, which is an introduction to basically historical thought and practice. And we start out looking at what I very broadly, sweepingly call non-modern forms of social memory. And one of the particular cases we looked at was actually from very recent. It is of Quechua-speaking campesinos in Ayacucho in Manga, where in the build-up to the annual carnival, they perform dances which, as it were, recreate the world that they've left behind, that they were basically forced into leaving by Sendero Luminoso. And it talks about the phrase used by the author of the piece we were reading was, dancing a place into being. And this idea that, you know, something like dance can actually not just reflect a world or represent it, but generate a world. I think, you know, this helps us, I think, to get into the this sort of unlearning frame of mind, because it is so alien in a way to our modern sensibilities.
So we are coming up to the end of our hour, and I'm really annoying with this. Every session, I'm like, no going over, no kind of, always, no matter how fruitful and engaging and all those threads of the conversation, just stop so it can be just a drop in our day as we then proceed onwards with all the things that we have to do, all those emails we have to write, all those classes we have to prepare for. Every single thing, and that's why this that's why this space is so precious, I think, and I hope those of you that are encountering it for the first time will come back to it, because you know, it feels like we've gone very far away from ourselves to then be coming back. So I'm very glad to see so many familiar faces, new faces, and yeah, so the recording will be available. The links are on the site. I've put in some of the links to the projects that we're doing there as well. I don't know if, Michelle, you want to say a final word, and then we'll...
Yeah, just a final word, maybe thinking about the things that are emergent from this discussion, and the spirit, you know, of collaboration, that we do, part of our funding is available, you know, for ideas about collaboration and also for student research participation. So yeah, we keep pursuing those opportunities that sometimes are structured in terms of how we schedule our events and calendar, and other times emerge, you know, from our discussions in this group. So we invite that type of thing. Just one last comment is that we do have a student conference in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and this year the invited keynote speaker is Walter Mignolo. So we'll keep you posted on that, because that intersects so nicely with our discussions in this group.
Wow. Wow, that's news to me. That's very exciting, Michelle.
We keep talking about unlearning frames of mind. I'm going to have to start day drinking again.
Why did you ever stop?
Doctor's orders.
Okay, everyone, take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.